So let's talk about late adulthood, biosocial development. We're in the home stretch here. Um, One of the issues that arises is the whole idea of prejudice and discrimination. And of course, just as we talk about racism and sexism, there is ageism, which is prejudice in which people are categorized and judged solely on the basis of their chronological age. Considered people as part of the category and as not individuals, and we can target people at any age. Incidentally, ageism not only affects older people, it affects younger people as well. So the fact is that you can't work if you're under the age of 16, which is discrimination. Institutional ageism is institutionalized. In the United States, it's pervasive in our culture, in the media, in employment, in retirement. Um, its effects are corrosive and erodes feelings of competence among older people. And of course, attitudes towards longevity vary between context and culture. For example, the context of driving cars versus how people in different Asian cultures look at elderly as opposed to the United States. The elderly's view of ageism is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They sort of expect this. And of course, stereotypes can be as debilitating for the aged as they can be for any other group. This just gives you an example of the differences between old and young in Chinese culture, American deaf versus American hearing. We have drops in performance across all the age groups, especially the elderly. Of course, there are some things that happen in age that change, including sleep. Sometimes the day-night circadian rhythm changes with age. Many older people wake up before dawn and are sleeping during the day. And of course, this contributes to poor health, sleep hygiene. If allowed to select personal sleep schedules, many elderly feel less tired than young adults, partly because they become accustomed to it or entrained to it. They also do less exercise. On average, only 35% of people over the age of 65 meet the recommended guidelines for aerobic activity, 16% for muscle strengthening. That is like doing things like weightlifting. Elder speak is a condescending way of speaking to old people that resembles baby talk with short, simple sentences, exaggerated emphasis, repetition, slower rate, and a higher pitch than normal speech. It's almost as if they don't understand what you're talking about. There is this type of destructive protectionism where elderly are discouraged from leaving home by some younger adults in the media. Street and violent crime rates are lower for those over 65 than they are for younger adults. This just shows how low it is at 65 and above as compared to 18 to 24. It's incredibly different. There is aging not only in the United States but across the world. A shift in the proportion of the younger population of various ages is occurring. Once there were 20 times more children than old people. Now nearly 8% of the world's population and 30% of the US population are over 65. This is the first time we've had more old people than young people. The demographic pyramid is no longer accurate, and the graphic representations of population as a series of stacked bars in which each age cohort is represented by one bar, with the youngest cohort at the bottom. That's changing. It doesn't look like that anymore. There are three reasons for the traditional pyramidal shape. Far more children were born than replaced the rate, so we have more at the bottom. Before modern sanitation and nutrition, many children died before the age of 5, and middle-aged people rarely survive adult diseases like cancer and heart attack. In fact, none of these statements are true today. The flipped demographic pattern is not yet universal. Most nations still have more people under 15 than over 65. Worldwide, children outnumber elders by more than 3 to 1, but not 20 to 1 as they once did. The United Nations predicts that by 2015, are for 1.9 billion people younger than 15 and 600 million older than 65. Not until 2075 is the ratio projected to be 1 to 1. Um, there's this thing called the dependency ratio. It involves estimating the proportion of people that depend or on care from other people. It's calculated by comparing the number of dependents to the number of people in the middle. For most nations, including the US, the dependency ratio is about 1 to 2, assuming that older adults are dependent. Is this accurate, inaccurate? What do you think? Something worth discussing. And is it changing? There are different types of old people. There are young old, which is about 70% of old people. Healthy, vigorous, financially secure older adults, those aged 60 to 75, who are well integrated into their lives and their families and their communities. There's the old, which is about 20%, older adults who are 75 to 85 years old, who suffer from physical, mental, or social deficits, deficits. And the oldest old, about the last 10%, elderly adults over the age of 85 who are dependent on others for almost everything, requiring supportive services such as nursing home care and hospitals. One important concept across all of the adult aging is called selective optimization with compensation. Every compensatory strategy involves personal choice, social practices, and technological options. 3 examples include sexual intercourse, driving, and of course the senses. So elderly people will compensate the best they can using what they've always used. So let's talk about those. Personal sexual compensation of sex. Most people remain sexually active throughout adulthood. Intercourse generally becomes less frequent and other behaviors become more important. Married couples adjust to whatever biological changes occur in their sexual arousal, but many also improve their relationship in the process. Remember, that's called selective optimization with compensation. The same is true with driving. Older adults drive more slowly. They may not drive at night because they can't see or may have trouble seeing, or when their weather is bad, but they may give up driving altogether. So societal compensation for age-related driving deficits are generally not available. Driver competency test is required in most states. And the third example is the senses. So senescence, or growing older, is pervasive and inevitable. There's no way around it. Obviously, in appearance, skin wrinkles, bodies change their shape, and the senses change as well. Only 10% of people over age 65 see well without glasses. Taste, smell, touch, hearing are also impaired. For example, by the age of 90, the average man is almost deaf, as are about half of women. Technology can compensate for almost all sensory loss. Visual problems using brighter lights, bifocals, or 2 pairs of glasses are sometimes needed. You can operate on cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration. They can be avoided or mitigated if they're diagnosed early enough. And elaborate visual aids like canes that sense where an object is near, infrared lenses, service animals, computers that speak written words, allow even the legally blind to be independent. Remember, technological compensation. These are just some examples I just mentioned about cataracts, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. And of course, you can see differences, macular degeneration on the bottom, the one that's fuzzied out. Even auditory problems can be fixed. Small sensitive hearing aids are available, but many people still hesitate to get aids, probably because it looks bad. Missing out on bits of conversation cuts down on communication and precipitates many social losses. Younger people tend to yell or use elder speak, both of which are demeaning. Elderly people are less vulnerable to stereotypes, threats, if they have positive interactions with the younger generation. So they get along with people. A passive acceptance of sensory loss increases morbidity, that's getting sick, of all kinds. It's often difficult to individualize available technology. That's a problem. And ageism, of course, is inherent in the design of everything from airplane seats to shoes. Many disabilities would disappear if the environment were better designed. But that's not the demographic they design for. It's typically middle-aged people. There's even compensation for the brain. In every aspect of aging, it's the brain that selects, optimizes, and compensates. The brain slows down, connections between parts of the brain diminish, The volume of the brain decreases, especially in the frontal lobes and the hippocampus, which of course is involved in memory. New neurons form and cognitive reserve compensate, but do not completely mitigate brain senescence. Exercise, nutrition, and drug avoidance and plasticity protect the brain to some degree. Unfortunately, those are skills and habits that need to take place earlier in life. This just gives examples of atrophy in the brain. Lowest on the left, nice thick brain tissue, 25th percentile. Median is at the 50th percentile. 75th percentile is even more. And then, of course, look at how different the highest is from the lowest. It's shriveled up pretty much. There are different types of aging. Sometimes it's one's called primary aging, which is universal. There's no way around it. It's irreversible physical changes that occur to all living creatures as they grow old. But secondary aging is the specific physical illnesses or conditions that become more common with aging, but result from poor health habits, genetic vulnerability, and other influences that vary from one person to the next. For example, the flu. Treatment of the elderly is because of primary aging, medical interventions, and affects the old differently than the young. Annual immunization is recommended for those over 65 because of their infirmities, making flu sometimes fatal. In 2012-13, vaccines protected the elderly reasonably well against the B strains of flu, but almost had no protection against the A strains, even though it protected the young. Treatment of the elderly cardiovascular disease is a big issue. These involve diseases of the heart and circulatory system. And you can see as it drops down in old age. Facts about CVD, chronic vascular disease is considerably considered a secondary aging problem, but not everyone gets it. No single factor like age, hypertension, inactivity, or smoking makes it inevitable. There are some links and risks among the elderly for CVD. And a 90-year-old is 1,000 times more likely to die from chronic vascular disease, cardiovascular disease than a 30-year-old, even though both have identical genes. Social context and health habits. Less than half of those over 65 have cardiovascular disease, like diabetes or dementia, but almost everyone has at least one of these by the time they reach 90. Risk factors and disease of the age are not distributed randomly. If a person has one risk factor, it's likely that he or she has several. Compensations for morbidity, shortening of the time a person spends ill or infirm before death, accomplished by postponing illness is important. Due to improvements in lifestyle, medicine, and technological aids, morbidity gets pushed back. North Americans who live to 95 are likely to be independent almost all of those years, which is amazing. Falling is a big issue. With age, bones become more porous, they lose their strength, calcium, they lead to osteoporosis where bones can be broken very easily. The most common liability elderlies experience from falling is a fear so that they reduce their activity, which causes them to be sicker. It's a vicious cycle. There are some different theories of aging. One of them is called the wear and tear theory, which is a process by which the human body just simply wears out due to the passage of time and exposure to stressors. There's a genetic clock theory, which is a mechanism in which the DNA of the cell that regulates the aging process, especially those telomeres, by triggering hormonal changes and controlling cellular reproduction and repair. Of course, that's President George W. Bush, poor H.W. Bush. There's the Hayflick limit, which is the number of times a human cell is capable of dividing into new cells. There is a limit. I saw somewhere there are like 50 divisions. Telomeres, of course, are at the ends of the chromosomes, and they are super important in regulating this. And telomerase is the enzyme that increases the length of the telomeres. One thing that you can do to extend aging is to slow down your consumption of calories. So eat about 80% instead of 100%. The immune system is made up of B cells and T cells, the immune cells that in the bone marrow that create antibodies for isolating, destroying bacteria and viruses, while T cells are made by the thymus gland that produces substances that attack infected cells in the body. So your immune system changes as well. The maximum lifespan predicted, the oldest possible age of which a member of the species can live under ideal conditions for humans, it's about 122 years. The average life expectancy on there is the number of years that the average person in a particular population is likely to live to. In the US today, the average life expectancy from birth is about 75 years for men and 81 for women. Dramatic variations from nation to nation, and this has changed even in the US over the centuries. Finally, all the theories of aging and all the research on genes, cells, calorie restrictions, certains, antioxidants, and so on have not yet yielded any straightforward way to stop senescence. So in other words, once the clock starts ticking, it will stop eventually.